Jeffrey graduated from James Monroe High School in 2004. I hate to think that we're going to spend another generation going forward with that kind of mess. He'd done everything that had been asked of him. His parents were proud of him. His teachers were proud of him. People from, when my son started a second career, he was a banker. Well, he went to Davidson, I would tell him that. He had 4 years at Davidson that were really great. He started his career as a banker, then he decided he didn't like that, and he went back to school, got his master's in sports management, and got a job with the Redskins. Had a little article in the paper, Jeffrey Scott, former JM quarterback, da-da-da-da-da. Oh boy, everybody wanted to claim him then again. But he was devastated. That was a devastating experience. I hope that what I've shared with you is enough to cause you to think. Help other people understand what happens. Because all we ever tried to do, at least as to my family, was to fit in. Do the right thing, get a college degree, advance ourselves. Now, it's important for me to say this to you because I didn't really realize this until very late in my life, that my child is a fortunate child. I was a fortunate child. My husband was a fortunate child. My parents were college educated. My husband's parents were college educated. Scotty and I were college educated, and Jeffrey's college educated. We did not just pop up and we're not the first generation of people to get educated. So if you stop and think about how long it has taken us to still feel like we belong and that we can be judged by what we produce and who we are, not individually in individual circumstances, but on the broader spectrum, you can understand why people are angry. I am more frightened now as a 62-year-old adult than I was when I was younger, because I see us going backwards. I see people being complacent and believing that everything that's been done is satisfactory and that all that stuff's behind us, and it happened a long time ago, like Jeffrey told us, like it's a legend. It's not a legend. I've just given you examples of how this stuff is current, and it's a daily part of people's lives. It's a daily part of my life. I choose not to allow it to get me down. And those of you that know me know that. I'll go anywhere, do anything, I'm fearless. But that's because I've had enough experience under my belt to be able to do that. Others may not have been as fortunate. With that, I'm going to close and give you opportunity to ask me questions if you want. And I'll stick around. I know some of you want to go to church, and some of you got to go to choir, and you can go to Falmouth Baptist Church now, Trav. Thank you so much for your courage.
We do have several minutes to share questions together. So if you have particular questions for Alda, I know she would be more than forthright in answering them. Go ahead, Dave.
I'd be interested in what motivated your parents to make, they obviously made some decisions when you were young that pushed you ahead, but also put you in difficult situations. And just, I'm fascinated by who they were. Would you talk a little bit about them and why they did what they did?
The one thing that drove what happened with me particularly was my father. My father was one of 8 kids. His oldest sister, my father was the 3rd youngest child, went to college. She went to Clark. She was a very bright young lady, and some Methodist white lady in Portsmouth, Virginia saw how smart she was and ensured that she got an education. And so my grandfather, who was a curmudgeon, I loved him to death, believed, and he had 8 children, he had 5 boys, 3 girls. He believed in educating the girls so that they could advance their lives, but he did not believe in educating the boys. So my father was the first boy to buck my grandfather and go to school, and my granddaddy kicked him out of the house. So daddy had to work. My father's dream was to be a doctor, and my father was in medical school and got drafted to go to Korea, where he never went. He only got as far as Oklahoma. He then married my mother. He never got a chance to go back to school. So my father was motivated that his children would always be able to accomplish their goals. My mother, on the other hand, was from a very privileged family. They were property owners. My mother lost her parents. Her father died before she was born. Her mother died when she was 10. They were raised by their paternal grandparents because my grandfather was an only child. And my great-grandfather owned a private taxi service where he drove people from Norfolk to New York and other places. So they were reasonably, my mother was reasonably well off. And so education was seen as the way to get ahead. What people do not understand now is that in the black community, since slavery, education was viewed as the way to advance yourself. And this concept that black people can't learn and don't want to learn is hooch. Okay, it is just not true. It is just that our systems have so broken down that there's so many people that are lost that has been lost. And I firmly believe, some of you that know me have heard me say this, I believe that integration ruined the black community because at least when I was growing up, I lived in a neighborhood where there were doctors, lawyers, teachers, and I knew that you could aspire to do something beyond what somebody may tell you you could do. So as a consequence of that, as upward mobility happened because of integration, people like my parents, they moved out of their black neighborhoods because they could go other places, and they left people in the inner city that were poor and didn't have role models around them. And that is why we are where we are with education. It's not because it's not been viewed as a way or a path forward. I don't know if that helps you, but that.
Time for another question. Anybody else?
Yes. Alda, what advice do you give us as a community, to the leadership of this community, to try to approach reversing this trend we are seeing? There have been various suggestions for community forums, etc., and we're all struggling with how to do it.
I think that Alan's approach and the approach you all are taking here is a good start. You can't have dialogue until you have some understanding. And what has happened is we get together in big groups and there's no understanding. As I was taught growing up in the church, I mean, people think it's strange that I'm an Episcopalian and I'm a cradle and my mama was a cradle and they think that only black people are Baptists. That's one of my Fredericksburg stories. What are you doing going to Trinity? I'm an Episcopalian. Why would I go to Trinity? But the bottom line is, I think you need to have dialogue among yourselves first and some understanding before you can sit down and have that dialogue with someone that's different. And it kind of goes back to your Christian faith, which tells you to love others even when they don't love you back. But you got to have empathy before you can have love. And we now live in silos. We don't associate with people that are not like us. We live in communities where it's great. I mean, I hear people say this all the time. You know, oh, everybody in my community likes, we think alike. I don't think that's good. I think all that does is to reinforce whatever negatives there may be, and it doesn't necessarily mean a long race. I think you need to sit down and learn for yourself first. And if you like, there are some books that are coming out now that are really, really good that can help you to understand some of these issues because we're scared to talk about this. Mm-hmm. And my experience is that in a group of whites, you're not going to say what you really think because you think somebody's going to attack you if you say it. So you've got to get comfortable with where you are and why you're there before you start saying that in a mixed race group. I am not. I'm fearless. I don't care. Okay? I think sometimes part of where we are now, and some of this talk about political correctness, is people's perceptions of what people think they will react to, as opposed to talking to somebody. I hear the word racism used so much now that it makes me sick. Everything is not racist. Hello, let me give you an alert. We all have prejudices. All of us. I don't care what color your skin is. It's how you act on those prejudices that makes the difference. So let's get past all of this stuff. I used to talk to college classrooms and they would say, why do we have to have a Black History Month? Why do we have to have Kwanzaa? And there were black kids in the class and I said, how many of y'all celebrate Kwanzaa? You know what? Nobody raised their hand. And I said to the person that raised the question, I said, aren't you upset? You've wasted energy for years being upset that black people have their own Christmas holiday and you find out they don't even celebrate it. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. We don't talk.
Alda, thank you so much for your time. I know she's willing to stay and have a closer conversation. I want you to know what's on the table as you leave. There are some biblical theological foundations for our conversations on a white sheet. For those of you who weren't here last week, there's a little fun worksheet that we used. It's yellow. Then there's also a vision statement that talks about how our denomination has approached this entire study. You're welcome to any of them. They're on the table. So please, once again, please thank Alda for her time.
I'll be with you the next 2 Sundays. I'm not going anywhere.
Go in peace. See you work.
Thanks.